Let's press Tab to go into edit mode, and I'm going to press T to bring up my tool shelf and property shelf, and press my full screen button over here. And with this whole cube selected here in edit mode, I'm going to press W to subdivide, and then press W to subdivide once more. Okay, so to kind of wrap up our session on the basic mesh tools, and let's just go ahead and click on the basic button so we can see those. I want to talk about deleting and adding mesh in particular faces. So with these four faces selected here, I could just press D to duplicate, as we can press D to duplicate whole objects. We can delete mesh by simply pressing X. Depending on what kind of mesh selection you're using, deleting parts of your mesh will be different. So for instance, if I were to shift select these four faces up here and press X, you see it deletes exactly just that selection. But if I press Ctrl Z to undo that, and I shift scroll down with my mouse, and this switches us to Vertex Selection, if I delete these vertex points rather than just the faces, then if I press X to delete that, it appears as though this entire row of faces have been deleted. And the reason why that happens is if I press Ctrl Z to undo that, these other faces, say this one here, 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 and all around these four faces here, their existence is dependent upon the vertex points in these corners, which compose these four faces in the center. So without these vertex points to anchor the rest of these particular faces, then these faces cannot exist. And so that's why if we delete these vertex points, all the rest of the faces are destroyed as well. But if we tap space to switch this to only faces, then we are not indeed deleting the vertex points, so they still remain to allow these other faces to exist. And so instead, only the actual faces, the kind of the gray matter of the polygons, are gone. So when we press X. So I'll press Ctrl Z to undo that. So if I shift scroll up to do edge selection and we press X, we get something else going on. We can actually see the remaining edges still there, only without the fourth edge to complete each one of these, because we deleted them, their polygon faces are also non-existent. For these polygon faces to exist, they need a minimum of 3 complete sides that are touching to, form a full shape. So just wanted you to be aware that there's a difference between deleting with face selection, edge selection, or versus vertex selection. So I'll press Ctrl Z to undo that, tap space to switch this over to faces. Say I did delete this, press X. I can fill in this hole by pressing F when we are in edit mode. If you're in object mode, pressing the F key does stuff related to animation, but when you're in edit mode, you can think of F for fill. So if I were to shift scroll up to do edge selection, and then I could click on one of these edges and shift select all of these edges around this hole here. Or a much faster way to do that, if I double click to deselect everything, is to hold Alt and click on one of these edges, and holding Alt and clicking will do a loop selection, whether you are using vertices, edges, or faces. So that's very convenient. We have this whole ring selected around this empty hole, and to fill it, instead of pressing X to delete, we just press F to fill, and it will fill our faces there. The F key in edit mode does a lot of really cool stuff. Another thing it can do is if we press D to duplicate these four faces here, and then hold middle mouse to constrain and just raise this straight up, and then tap space for face selection, and then select this face, shift, select all these faces, and then go ahead and shift select these faces. I can also press F to bridge a gap. So if I were to press F there, it fills that. I could then shift scroll up for edge selection, Alt select this ring of edges here, and tap F to fill in there. Now, when the mesh is very simple like this, Blender is able to figure out how to perfectly fill these meshes, but sometimes when the mesh is really complicated, instead of getting a perfectly equidistant fill of faces, you'll sometimes get a solid face. If I were to tap space for face selection and then shift select some selection of faces like this, and maybe shift add some over here, and I were to press X to delete all those, and then shift scroll up to do edge selection, and then hold Alt to do an edge loop, and then press Alt Shift to add more edge loops to that selection until we fill this whole thing by holding Alt Shift and clicking on each one of these. So now we have a much more complicated hole here. So if we just tap F, it doesn't exactly work out how we would want it to. So what we can do is tap F again. And so even with this, that doesn't look that great. So what we would probably want to do is press Control Z to undo all that. And then we would have to fill this more incrementally. So what I could do is come down to this edge here and then press Shift scroll down for vertex selection. I could actually click on this vertex point, shift click this vertex point and press F. And this fills in the edge between these two vertex points. I could then shift scroll up to do edge selection, and then shift select this edge and shift select this edge. And with these three edges selected, if I press F, this should fill in a face, even though I don't have a fourth edge there. So if I tap F, that fills that in. So I could then Alt select this, a loop of faces here, tap F there, and that gets filled in. Although this created a single face, whereas we would probably want this to be individual faces, so I could press Control Z. And what we could do is shift scroll down, select that vertex point, shift select that vertex point, press F again, which creates an edge for us. And then shift scroll up to do edge selection and shift select these edges here, tap F, and then we could select this edge, shift select that edge, tap F again, Alt select this, and Alt Shift select this and tap F, and we can fill that in as well. So we'll get into a lot more stuff with geometry and shapes, but for now, just know that we can use X to delete things and F to fill in things, whether that's creating new edges between vertex points or filling in actual faces between edges or vertex points. So the F key in edit mode is very versatile. A minute ago, we duplicated these four faces here from these four faces, and we bridged these faces by pressing F. And so that's kind of a rudimentary way to do that. But if we use this Shift F for the bridge edges, we have a little more options to doing a similar task to that. So for instance, if I were to tap space for face selection and then shift select these faces here, press D to duplicate this, middle mouse to constrain and bring it out, and then shift select these other faces. I could just tap F as kind of a quick fix all for filling in or connecting mesh and things. But if I press Shift F, or I were to press this Bridge Edges button, we can then double tap space, which gives us immediate access to that tool's customizable options. We can add more cuts to that bridge. We can actually twist that bridge, as you can see there. We can control smoothness, profile factor, which is kind of fatness like this. And we can do a number of things. But you may want to double tap space after using a lot of tools, because you'll find that there's typically more customizable options